guys, so today we're going to be talking about the New Deal, which was FDR's response to the Great Depression. So just let me give you a little bit of background from where we are right now. So we've been talking about Herbert Hoover and kind of some of the things that he did, and people were really unhappy with his response. People thought that he wasn't trying hard enough. And in 1932, when the new presidential election took place, the nation overwhelmingly spoke. And Franklin Roosevelt, guy with these new ideas, who was promising this new deal to the American people, was elected in a landslide. So today we're going to look at some of the programs that he initiated as part of his role as president. Your worksheet should look something like this, where it says the New Deal on the top, and it's got these like different abbreviations down the side here. So we are going to first start by just taking a look at like who Roosevelt was as a person, his personality, and how that kind of affected who he was. So Franklin Roosevelt is from New York City. If the name sounds familiar, it is because he is a distant cousin of Theodore Roosevelt. He married a woman named Eleanor Roosevelt. Yes, that is her maiden name, because guess what? She's also a distant cousin. I should note that she's a very distant cousin. She was actually a niece to Theodore Roosevelt. And they were married. Supposedly it was a very happy marriage, at least in the beginning. And Roosevelt, when he was a young man, was very active, very athletic. However, in 1921, he gets the disease called polio. So if you don't know anything about polio, it attacks your nervous system. And for Roosevelt, it paralyzed him from the waist down. So he was partially paralyzed. He could stand if he was given leg braces, but it was very painful for him to do this. He didn't have a lot of weight and support. And what's interesting about this is that the media knows about this, but Roosevelt does a really good job of keeping this quiet. The media agrees to keep it quiet for him. He is almost never photographed. He is never photographed pretty much in his wheelchair. If he is sitting, he is always just in a regular chair, as you can see with this picture with him and his dog Fala down here. Or he is photographed in his leg braces standing behind a podium, so you can't see his legs. If he's photographed in his car, you can't tell that the car is like hand controlled. He could drive. He had hand controls in his car. And this is something he was worried that if people knew about his disease, that it would look weak to the American people, and that was not his goal. He was a very charismatic guy. He wanted to give hope to the American people, and he was able to do that. I find it very interesting, this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt in her autobiography. She says, "Franklin's illness proved a blessing in disguise, for it gave him strength and courage he had not had before. He had to learn the greatest of all lessons, infinite patience and never-ending persistence." This is something I think that comes across very much in his role as president. You're going to see a lot of this as we look through this. You also may be familiar with the phrase from his inaugural address, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." This idea that we shouldn't be afraid of the economy. We shouldn't be afraid of the terrible things that are going on. So this is kind of the guy that he was, right? In terms of the way he ran his office, he recognized right off the bat that he was not the best mind out there. He was a straight C student when he was in school, right? So not stupid, but not the best kid either, right? So he sought advice from the best minds, and this was nicknamed his brain trust. These were professors, economists, experts in all kinds of fields, and their job was to kind of advise him to make sure that he was doing the right thing in terms of his programs and what he needed to do. So he was really good at getting opinions and getting second opinions. He was also really good at experimenting, right? He was willing to experiment. He's quoted as saying, try something, and if it doesn't work, try something else, right? And so you'll see that a lot of these programs, some of them have some pretty controversial parts of them. Some of them don't work, so they try again, kind of keep experimenting with this. So Roosevelt is willing to just put everything out there and try and get as much back from it as he can. Now, when he becomes president, there's a few things that he kind of talks about. And the whole New Deal, all of these programs, and then some, are passed in the first 100 days of his presidency, okay? And the rest of his presidency is kind of getting these programs to work. So he utilizes a lot of the resources that he has available to him, namely radio. So the Fireside Chats were some radio programs that he would come on the radio once a week, and it was his way of being able to connect with the American people. He could sit down and explain exactly what he was doing and why he was doing it and what the goal was and what the purpose was. And this is a way that the American people felt very connected to the president, like he's almost sitting in their living room having a conversation. This is very new. We couldn't do this before radio, right? So the next thing that he does, in his very first Fireside Chat, he announces this, where he says, we're going to close all of the banks all over the country. and we're going to send in people to assess the banks and figure out which ones can stay open, which ones are dead, right? And try to get this country back on its feet. Okay, so the bank holiday is basically a way of trying to get this whole ball rolling and get everything started. His main belief that he has for the New Deal is that capitalism can coexist with relief from the government. People did not really think this before the 30s. It seemed too socialist, too communist, too scary, right? But FDR really believed that these two things could coexist and work together. And really, that's what the New Deal is all about. That's the core of the New Deal. So I call this, my name for this is alphabet soup. That is all these different government agencies. Because if you look, you will notice that they all have these abbreviations, right? So ABC, FDIC, SEC, XYZ, whatever, YOU. But all of these different agencies have three main purposes. This alphabet soup, all of this together. The first is relief. So these are immediate relief programs for people who are suffering. We need to fix their problem right now, okay? The second is recovery. So this is getting people back to work. The economy needs to be healed, right? Given some medicine to the economy to fix what's wrong. These programs are intended to be temporary, not something that's going to last forever, just to get the economy back on your feet. When you're sick, you don't take antibiotics after you get better, right? You stop taking the medicine when you're done. So that's the idea here. The last one is reform, okay? Reform is actually changing the problems that caused everything in the first place. So the corruption in the stock market, changing those. These are programs that are intended to be permanent, right? To fix what's wrong so it doesn't happen again. So in this alphabet soup of programs, you're going to find that they are either relief, recovery, or reform programs, okay? So that's a kind of pay attention to that as we're talking through this here, okay? So let's go ahead and jump right into our first program. So first we have the first New Deal, or the FDIC. So the FDIC is the Federal Depositors Insurance Corporation. This goes back to the banks. Okay, so remember, the main problem is when people started running on the banks, they were not able to get their money out. And when the banks run out of money, they shut down, right? So the purpose behind the FDIC is to make sure that each account is protected, insured by the government. The act that goes with this is called the Glass-Steagall Banking Act. That's the act that put this into place. And it protects each account in 1933 up to $5,000. So let's say I have $5,000 in my checking account, right? If the bank shuts down, I will get that $5,000 back from the government because they have insured my bank, right? Now let's say I had $10,000 in my account. I would only get half of that. I would only get that $5,000, but that's better than nothing, right? And keep in mind, most people did not have more than $5,000 in the bank. Most people today don't even have more than $5,000 in the bank. $5,000 was very, very high. The average minimum wage, or the average middle class salary was $2,000 a year. So that's just to let you know. Today, it is protected up to $250,000. Okay, this is still something that is in place today. So this is a great act because it gives customers confidence in their banks again. People have been worried about putting money back in the bank, as you can imagine, right? Because the banks lost all their money. So this lets them know, yes, my money is safe. And as I said, this is something that's still around today. Listen in commercials when they talk about banking institutions. You'll hear at the end of commercial, this bank is protected by the FDIC, right? And when you go to your bank, you should see one of these two symbols in your bank, right? This is the seal of the FDIC, and today they actually throw it in the initials here. If your bank is not FDIC insured, do not use it. Go right now. Take all of your money out of your bank. Go find a bank that's FDIC insured. Because if that bank shuts down, you will lose all of your money, right? Whereas with the bank that's FDIC insured, you'll be okay. The government protects your money in the bank to make sure that nothing like that can ever happen again. So is this a relief, recovery, or reform program? It's reform, right? The next one we have is the SEC. So the SEC is the Security and Exchange Commission. So similar to the FDIC, it is established with an act, the Federal Securities Act. And the idea behind this is that anybody who's playing the stock market companies in the stock market, they need to report all transactions that are going on. Because remember, the stock market is a piece of business. So when you buy a stock, you're buying part of that business. So you have a right to know what's going on in that business, right? So these reports keep people on track. The idea is that it's trying to stop insider trading or keep people from rigging the market. Because that had been what was going on in the stock market. Then like Joseph Kennedy, who knew that the stock market was about to go under, sold all his shares, got out before it crashed, right? So the idea here is to keep that from happening, to keep people from losing all of their money in the stock market. It does regulate the stock market. It exposes corruption, unethical trading practices that were going on. Again, the SEC is something that is still around today. It is still used. So again, relief, recovery, or reform. It's another reform program, right? And this is something that they still take very seriously. You'll hear this called white-collar crime. This is what Martha Stewart was arrested for a few years ago. So the SEC is regulation of the stock market, right? Next one that we have is the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. So this deals with another one of those causes of the Great Depression, right? So what was happening in farms? They were overproducing. That made prices drop, okay? So what they knew that they needed to do was to make sure that they reduced production so prices would go down. This may seem weird, but think about this, right? So supply and demand says if the supply of food is low, the demand will be high, and that will actually raise the price, okay? So if farmers did not produce so much, then they would actually raise their prices. Now think about this though. This is going to be a controversial decision. You don't just walk up to somebody and say, stop doing your job, right? You got to give them some incentive. So the government said, we're actually going to pay you to stop doing your job. So they paid farmers to just leave fields unplanted, right? If they had fields that were planted and they had too much, they paid up to $200 million. That's how much money they spent on this program to plow up crops, like anything that was already growing, pull them up, dead, you're done. To kill livestock, like just kill pigs, just, to reduce prices or to increase prices. Think about what this is doing, okay? There are people all over this country who are standing in food lines, who are starving, who don't have food. And the government is paying farmers to kill their livestock and destroy their crops, right? Can you see why this would be a controversial program? Now, it's successful in doing what it's supposed to do. It does increase the prices of crops. It does put money back in farmers' pockets. It also destroys food when there are people all over the country who are starving. And a lot of people are really upset by this program. This is one of the programs that's going to get the most heat from FDR's New Deal. We'll get back to what happens with that later. The next program we have is the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. So this one is about getting people to work, particularly in this situation, young men, okay? So this program hired young guys from the ages of 18 to 25 for conservation jobs, things like building roads, parks, planting trees. The Blue Ridge Parkway up in the mountains was built by the CCC. What these guys would do is they would go and live in these dormitories. They would get 25% of their paycheck would go directly in their pocket. The other 75% of their paycheck would go home to their families. So this is a way of getting the families into work, getting these young men working, right, and improving the country at the same time. It planted over 4 billion trees all over the country. It employed over 3 million people, black and white. Now, it was discriminated. There was segregation where there were black groups and there were white groups, but it did put both of those guys to work. These are just some pictures of a poster. You can see this picture down at the bottom is one of the African-American CCC groups. They wore uniforms. It was very similar to the kind of the Boy Scouts. The Blue Ridge Parkway was actually built by the African-American troops. All right, so the next one we have is FARA, the Federal Relief Administration. So the Federal Relief Administration was $250 million given directly to the states in order to provide clothing and food for people who were unemployed and homeless, right? So this is if you think relief, recovery, reform, this is an immediate relief, right? In addition to that $250 million, it would actually give matching funds to the states. So if the states were able to raise money, they would give an additional $250 million to them as well. So the idea here is that we are trying to help these people, right? People that are in trouble, people that need food, that need clothing. We are giving them something to relieve their stresses. So that's good. It does provide some relief. However, it doesn't get people to work, right? Great. You gave me a piece of bread today. I got to feed my family tomorrow too, right? So people still need jobs, and they need job creation, and this doesn't create any jobs. So that's what's going to lead to the next two programs we're going to talk about, the PWA and the CWA, okay? So they're going to kind of be going along with this. So this is actually two separate administrations versus the Civil Works Administration and the Public Works Administration. So the Public Works Administration actually comes first, the PWA, okay? The PWA created federal jobs, all right? And that's great, except that it doesn't really help unemployment because federal jobs don't really do a whole lot. So we needed to create jobs at the local level. That's why they add the CWA. So the CWA is created to give money to local governments in order to create jobs on the local level, right? So this gets people back to work. That's kind of the whole point of this. 4 million people are put to work immediately, build schools, roads, bridges, a lot of these just standard things that societies need that need to be built anyway. That's what they're going to be doing with this here. So you can see some of the things that they're built, the bridges, the road up at the top, ditches down at the bottom. It's a school that was built by the CWA. And again, the purpose is to get people working at the local level. This is job creation. This is part of the recovery effort, right? So the next one that we have is the National Industrial Recovery Act and the National Recovery Administration. So the NIRA it goes with the National Industrial Recovery Act. The NRA is the National Recovery Administration. So the idea here is going to fix industry. So it's trying to put fair competition into place by limiting production, by setting prices, so saying you can't charge more than this for this good, right? The idea is to kind of make sure that everybody has a fair say in the game. It limited work hours. It banned child labor. And union membership rose under this, okay? These sound like great things, right? The NRA is the National Recovery Administration. It sets up this to overcome kind of like wage cuts, falling prices, layoffs, because that's what a lot of this was going on in small businesses, right? You had to cut employees and cut wages, and the whole point behind this is saying you can't do that. You have to pay people a fair wage. You have to keep your prices at the right side. You have to make sure that you're not cutting jobs, right? So again, this seems like a good thing, and it does set up about 500 industrial codes to make sure that people are running their businesses fair. However, it really went to serve the interest of big business a lot more than it served the interest of small business. It also was seen as like really intense regulation on business, which is not something that Americans really liked, right? We didn't like business regulation so much. And it was seen as like too much government control over business. And this is another one that's going to get a lot of controversy attached to it. So if a business was an NRA member, you would put up this little sign in your window. The idea is it's trying to like encourage people to use businesses which are members of the NRA, right? Saying that we're the ones doing our part. It's encouraging people to be in unions, encouraging people to work for their fair wages. This sort of idea. So again, this is regulation of business, okay? The next we have is the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. So the whole idea is to construct dams and power plants along the Tennessee River and through its tributaries. In a lot of rural areas in the United States, it was almost 90% still unelectrified, right? So the idea here is to actually like bring people to work, but also to kind of modernize. It renovated 5 existing dams, constructed 20 new dams. Dams are important for power plants here. It created jobs. It provided flood control. It provided hydroelectric power. So this is power that's run on rivers. And it brought a lot of other benefits to a region that was relatively poor. I bet if you have family that's from the Tennessee Valley region and you ask them, that you had grandparents or great-grandparents that worked for the TVA. My great-grandfather worked for the TVA in Marietta, Georgia, working at a power plant. So this is just kind of a way of getting a very poor region, bringing them more modern, as well as getting them back to work. So you see here, these are just some of the dams that were built up at the top, spreading power lines in a region that had never seen electricity before. That's kind of what we're looking at here. The last program of the New Deal is the HOLC, the Homeowners Loan Corporation. So what was happening when people were losing their jobs? They're not able to pay off their mortgage. So the idea here is that people who are about to have their house foreclosed on them, taken away from the bank, it provides very low interest loans so they can pay back that loan to the bank. The bank's got their money, and then you owe now the government, but the loan is a low interest, so you can pay it back easily. It did save over 1 million homes in this country. It's a pretty big deal. However, if you look at the way the law is written, it does discriminate against what they quote as lesser peoples, or people that were not valuable. And mostly this is along race lines, particularly African American. So there is some discrimination that goes along with the HOLC. But this is something that does kind of help people out. All right, so these are all from the first New Deal. When Roosevelt is elected again in 37, I think, he puts into place what he calls his second New Deal. We've already tried to relieve and fix some of the problems. So the point of the second New Deal is to go beyond that relief and recovery effort. These are more of the reforms. This is also targeting kind of the forgotten man, the farmer, the laborer, the artist, right? A lot of people are actually really uncomfortable with some of the second New Deal plans. Basically, they said, why are we adding more government control if it's not needed, right? If it's not necessary, why do we need more government control? Okay, and a lot of people thought that maybe a lot of the first New Deal programs were not exactly working. And so there was a little bit of a controversy over why do we need more government regulation? You already have expanded the power of the federal government so much. Why do we need to keep expanding that power? So the second New Deal is a little bit more controversial. But just looking at some of these here, the first one we have is the WPA, or the Works Progress Administration. This program spends about $11 million creating as many jobs as possible, as quickly as possible. The whole point is kind of building projects, professional projects. This is very different from the CWA. This is skilled work. You might want to even write that down where it says professional, skilled work. People that are trained, people that have very specific skill sets, right? That's what they're doing here. These are projects that you need trained people to do, okay? So the WPA created a lot of buildings. It created 850 airports, over 600,000 miles of road, 125,000 government buildings, 300 million garment employees, artists, employed all kinds of people, right? So that's a lot of good stuff, right? However, a lot of people said, you're creating unneeded things. Why do we need all this stuff? So you're making these work programs and you're paying people for stuff we don't even need, right? So that's kind of where the controversy over the WPA comes in. The next one we have is the National Labor Relations Board. So this is very similar to the NIRA. So this is created by the Wagner Act, okay? So this is kind of controlling labor unions. The Wagner Act supported collective bargaining, and it listed a bunch of unfair labor practices, such as saying, if you join a labor union, I'm going to fire you, threatening to fire someone, actually firing union workers, interfering with union organization. Basically, the idea here is we're encouraging labor unions, right? They heard testimony about unfair practices. They held elections to see if workers actually wanted to be represented by a union, right? So this is very pro-labor, pro-union. It recognizes workers' rights. It reestablishes collective bargaining that had been declared unconstitutional in 1935. So collective bargaining, again, is labor unions kind of banding together, threatening to say, we're going to go on strike if you don't do this. So this says, nope, that's okay. You're allowed to do that as part of a union if you're doing it well and getting what you need out of it. The next one we have is the Fair Labor Standards Act. So this sets a maximum work week and a minimum work age. So 40 hours a week, 75 cents an hour, right? Or whatever it is. So at this time, it was 25 cents an hour, up to 40 cents an hour within 2 years. So you have to start at 25 cents. And in 2 years, you've got to be able to gradually increase that to 40 cents an hour. That doesn't seem like a very lot by our standards, but remember, money's a little different in this time period. The maximum work week was 44 hours per week, and by 2 years, they were going to decrease that to 40 hours, right? People needed a lot more work as they're trying to solve these problems. So the idea is you start your wage low and eventually work up, and you start your work week high and eventually work down, right? It also banned people under 16 from factory work. So there were still situations where children were working in factories. There was not national child labor laws yet, and so that makes that illegal. This is successful in setting national laws to cover wages and protect workers. It's something they've been fighting for since the Progressive era, right? This is a big step. The next one we have is the Social Security Administration. So this was targeting the elderly. Basically what happens is when you retired, that was it, right? You had no money to hold you unless your company actually provided it for you. So this is a pension or a retirement plan provided by the government for retired employees and their spouses. It also gave death benefits. If you're killed on the job, your children get death benefits. They can be able to keep going without you, especially if you're the main breadwinner for your family. If you are unemployed, it has unemployed benefits. So if you go file for unemployment, you can get a set amount of money for a short time until you find a new job. So this is part of the Social Security Administration. It gave aid to disability. So the Disability Act is part of this. And finally, it helps the elderly, right? As I said. So this provided a supplement to a private retirement plan. It helps people who may not have a private retirement plan. And this is targeting those forgotten people that I was talking about a second ago. However, it did leave some groups out, like farmers and domestic workers, people that worked in jobs where they might not even be paid, but in cash, right? This is something that's still around today, and there's a lot of controversy that still surrounds the SSA, the Social Security, which we'll get more into a little bit more in class. So, whew, that's a lot, right? I know that was a lot of information. You're not going to necessarily have to memorize what each and every one of these does, but you should have a pretty general idea, okay? So I'll see you in class as we continue talking about the successes and failures of the New Deal programs and how they were. Have a great day. Bye.